My name is Dustin Ragland. I work for Ableton Inc., which is part of Ableton, the global music production company that's based in Berlin, Germany. And then we have a US office here in Pasadena, but I work remotely myself in Atlanta, Georgia. When I graduated college, I was a touring musician. I actually went on tour as a drummer for about 11 years. And in the middle of that, I always enjoyed teaching. I always enjoyed education. And I kind of, like anyone in a band, thought, I don't know how long this will last. And so I noticed that I enjoyed making music and also helping others to learn how to make music themselves. And by getting to know some of the music software, in this case Ableton Live, pretty well, when not a lot of people necessarily knew it that well, I just became a first call for friends who are, I'm trying to do this thing, I'm trying to figure this out, or they wanted someone who was able to apply what you could do in the software with a computer to a band situation or to a live performance setting. Relatively straightforward, post-secondary studies with some things that within music that are always never that straightforward. And so in the schooling side, like I have an undergraduate degree in biblical languages and in English, something very unrelated to music. And so but because I was a musician and touring, I kind of had all this practical experience within the production side of things, within the obviously touring and playing music live. And at the same time, I had a habit that I had grown from in my university, my undergraduate studies, of just a habit of learning, to put it really broadly. And the kinds of things that I work with now, the programs that I work with, a lot of them didn't exist, even 10 years ago. And so a lot of that was done just studying on my own, and then through trying to pick up pieces of those existing programs from afar. Then I ended up doing a graduate degree in music technology in 2019. And so I did follow up with a graduate degree in there, and that became pretty essential for my job in speaking with educators and speaking with academics and being able to not only have the skills that came from the program, but also context for being able to intelligently discuss their needs and ways to help them with teaching. The general economy of being an independent artist or an up-and-coming artist, unless you have a very large label or money source behind that, it's really tough to kind of break through how much music is released and made all the time. And that's maybe the sad view, but the bright view in that, the positive view in that, is that music production is easier than ever for anyone to make the music that they want to make, and easier in ways that it's more affordable. There are free tools that are really powerful, all the way up to paid things of all different kinds. And it's also easier for you to share music with people. And so to make a record, inside of all of that is spending less money on the recording side and the things that happen up front, and finding ways to source musicians or to be the musician yourself, to use affordable microphones and recording interfaces and software. All those things are more affordable for the artist now, so that you're not in debt to someone just to pay off at the beginning of your record. And so a lot of musicians too are starting to really realize that one of the healthiest ways to be a record-making musician now is to really spend all the time that you can and becoming a better musician with your instrument or with music production or beat making or whatever you're doing, but also have a job that allows you to not feel like you have to make music the thing that makes all that money, because then you might be changing things in the music you're trying to make or the art you're trying to make in whatever form that is, just to try and pay bills with it, and you end up disliking it anyway. And it's like finding a way to have work that can pay some bills while freeing you to the music is something that feels more and more like the goal, as opposed to just being able to be a musician all the time. It's like I feel super fortunate to have toured for about 11 years, and that was my main job and income. But it's still, at the same time, that was super rare. It was really tough to do, and there were still really hard moments through all of that, of ups and downs of income, because it was based on how many gigs were happening, and that's never a reliable thing. Specifically things that are around, jobs in music, there's of course a marketing side of that. Everything from the typical traditional quote unquote label roles of, you know, A&R managers, of artist development, excuse me, of someone who works for a label that has multiple artists. And there's a lot of growth in even just the number of small labels where they're not spending millions of dollars to such and such to make an album that's going to go win a Grammy, but rather it's, I've got, you know, 3 or 5 different great beat makers and they're all doing these really cool mixtapes. I want to find a way to just organize them getting artwork and maybe getting some physical media out once in a while and help them to upload their tracks to iTunes, wherever they need to go, and or Spotify. And being someone who can navigate all those pieces in terms of digital distribution for artists, things like that, that's a huge thing now too. Being someone who can work as a visual artist alongside a musical artist, or as a kinetic artist that's working with, you know, dance and presentations. One of the great venues that still exist for a lot of music now is to be played, you know, at everything from a museum or like an art museum to public art installations to festivals that happen around like a food festival, not necessarily just a music festival. So being able to translate music for an artist and helping them to do that into other formats is another huge thing. And yeah, so there's a number of those pieces. And of course, there's still recording engineers. There are music production engineers, beat makers, those that'll just build a massive amount of maybe collections of beats that they then share with different artists or labels. Again, all these things kind of interconnect. You got to have the label there so that someone can listen to the music you're making, so that you also have these artists that are bringing the music that you're making out to other people. It's really interesting. I mean, a lot of musicians even go into jobs working with like post-production audio, for example, with Foley sound. And it's amazing that you are, you know, for a musician, they're developing these skills of listening and hearing. And that's very valuable for someone who is saying, we need the sound of someone walking in these kinds of shoes, and they're this big, and it's this kind of environment that they're in, and it's this kind of surface that they're walking on. In this case, this is something where polynomials are used in a specific kind of polynomial called a Chebyshev polynomial, or set of polynomials, I should say, are used to change the shape of a sound. And the sound has shape because it does behave as a wave. And we talk about it as a wave in both math sense and in the practical sense. You know, wave form is the name that we give to the picture of a sound, like this right here. What's peculiar about it is that every sound that we hear gets built out of these sine waves. So these simple waveforms that they combine together in all of the ways that we can identify, oh, that's this voice of a person that means a lot to me, to that's a trumpet, or that's a drum, or that's a car crashing into a tree or something like that. Those are all still being formed out of sine waves, which is amazing. And they're just a simple periodic mathematical waveform. You see this purple waveform, that's our original sound. We're not actually hearing it yet, but it's being run through this math equation. We're actually multiplying the sound itself, this sine wave. Every time you see an X in the equation, that's that sine wave being multiplied by a few different numbers. But the cool thing about this is we can take those numbers and turn them into their own signals of, in this case, a sine wave. When they multiply together, we get these really interesting waveforms like you see on the right that sound different. And so I've got this little simple interface, this box right here set up, that when I go across like this, you hear the pitch change for the sound. I'll turn it up just a little bit more. You kind of hear that pitch move around. But when I go vertically, you're going to hear the timbre, or the character of the sound. You hear it change, and then these different kinds of waveform shapes emerge out of there, which is pretty fun to even just see the way that they look in comparison to their original regular mathematical form. And the whole time this is happening, it's still math that's under the hood drawing all this stuff around and doing this. It just ends up being a really creative way of applying math in a very practical way. The application of polynomials in this case is part of changing a sound that already exists. Someone working in music, another job is for someone who does have a command of these mathematical concepts and a command of the equations to be able to think, when I created this synthesizer, for example, that sits in a computer, it uses a lot of the computer's CPU, and that doesn't make sense for a musician to be able to use that live, because what if it breaks down during a performance? And that's a major thing, even as great as computers have gotten. And so in this case, software coder, the creative coder, the developer is able to say, here's a place where I can use the math to make it more efficient. You're able to create an array, a set of pre-existing equations that then you tell the computer, look up T1, look up T4, look up T10. And that's what these Chebyshev polynomials have done, is make things a lot simpler for computer, and in this case for musician to use, because now you have this really efficient way of performing with it.